From 2004 to 2014, Democrats enjoyed quite a streak, winning 6 governor's races in a row. But in the last 3 elections, they've lost to Chris Sununu, the incumbent governor now seeking a 4th term. The first Democratic challenger to step forward is Dr. Tom Sherman, a state senator, and he joins us in studio this morning. Doctor, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Adam. It's great to be here.
So we know you well from the state Senate and the House, where you've served over the last decade. But if people are just getting to know you for the first time here on Close Up, tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're running for governor.
Well, thanks. So my whole life has been about service. I've spent the last 30 years as a gastroenterologist, most recently at Exeter Hospital. I formed Core Gastroenterology. I've moved, as I've become more and more involved in the legislature, I've moved more and more out of clinical medicine. But that same focus on the individual, on the patient, on the constituent is all consistent with how I approach my service career, which is really about helping that one person. And what I've found, which has really been my guiding light, is that if I focus on that person, I won't go wrong. Whatever I do, I'm doing it for the benefit of that person. And in medicine, it was the patient. In the legislature, it's my constituents.
You bring a unique medical perspective, obviously. Let's talk about that new COVID subvariant, BA2. We're still learning about it, and frankly, if you're elected governor and being sworn in January 2023, it's probably not the variant we're going to be talking about at that point. So take us to that moment in time, though. If you're being sworn in January 2023, we're seeing a surge in cases, and the state response is the same as it is right now. Are you implementing a statewide mask mandate on day one?
That's a great question. It really depends on the numbers. That's when a mask mandate is helpful. You have to look at what's called the epidemiology, which is how pervasive is it in the community. If it's not pervasive, then we don't need a mask mandate. But the real goal is to make sure our schools stay open, our businesses stay open, they're allowed to function. And that's why I've been so opposed to the legislature telling businesses they can't do what they need to do to protect themselves, protect their customers, protect their employees. That's a business decision. And that can be based on these numbers. So a mask mandate probably would not be necessary. But if the numbers say it is, which is really an objective approach, if the numbers say it is, then we may need to do that. But that would not be my first response.
Even the most basic precautions have been put into this sort of hyper-partisan jar and shaken up, and people get really charged up about these things now. Obviously, we saw the protests outside of Governor Sununu's house during the pandemic. How would you respond if armed protesters showed up outside your house in Rye?
Well, I've been told by the chief that he's got my back, and I think that's true. And certainly, I think Governor Sununu felt well protected, even in his own home. But I would actually go out and talk to them. That's part of what I do. I listen. I want to hear their point of view. You know, in the Senate, we have varying opinions on whether or not vaccines are effective, masks are effective, whether there should be mandates, but we talk. I listen. Doesn't mean that I agree, but it does mean that I'm hearing them. And that's one of the things that I will bring to the governorship.
One of the arguments Governor Sununu made against the Democratic nominee in 2020 was on this paid family and medical leave program, which would have been funded by a, quote, premium on wages. The governor calls that an income tax. Already you're being attacked along these same lines. So how are you going to defend yourself when that argument seemed to work with the voters in 2020?
Well, it didn't work in my district. I had many Republicans coming out and saying that's just a lie. It's not an income tax. If it's an income tax, our unemployment insurance is an income tax. It's actually a form of insurance. Was it the right solution? Maybe, maybe not. The governor has come out with another solution, which his own party is now trying to repeal. But most importantly, whether it's income tax, tax cuts, I've never voted for an income tax. I never will vote for an income tax or a sales tax. But what we have to do is we have to get back to focusing on tax cuts that will benefit most of the people of New Hampshire, most of the businesses of New Hampshire, and that's property tax. And Mr. Property Tax, Chris Sununu, has raised property taxes with his legislature over his entire term. We have to stop that. If we're going to do tax cuts, let's not do it for the out-of-state corporations or the wealthiest who need it the least. Let's do it for the people, everyday people of New Hampshire, and that's through property tax. And we did that in 2019.
To the specifics of that paid family leave funding mechanism, if the company didn't fund the program, the money was going to come out of wages. I guess, how is that not a tax on somebody's take-home pay?
Well, if that's the case, then we already have that, right? We have that unemployment insurance is coming out of people's wages. We make a decision in the legislature whether or not that's appropriate. The people have a chance to respond. The governor vetoed that. That's fine. Let's move on. It's not an income tax. Unemployment insurance is not an income tax. But let's give the benefit to the property tax owners. Those are our small business owners. Those are vast majority of the people of New Hampshire. And that's what that's my pledge, is to work really hard to make sure that we drop the burden of property tax on the people of New Hampshire.
Turning this around, one of your primary lines of attack against Governor Sununu is on this new late-term abortion ban in New Hampshire. In 1973, when Roe v. Wade was decided, viability was a standard they looked very closely at. And I think it's safe to say in medicine that standard of viability has changed in these last decades. As you know, neonatal care now for children born at 20, 22, 24 weeks, the survivability rate is much higher than it used to be. I looked this up. A study from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. The U.S. survival rate at 24 weeks is now 68%, and at 26 weeks, it's now 89%. So given those facts, why should an elective abortion be legal at 26 weeks?
Well, given those facts, why should an elected official be determining a woman's health? These are decisions that are made between a woman and her physician. The state has no place getting in that relationship between a doctor or a nurse and a woman. It's saying to a woman, we don't value your decision-making capacity. And, Senator Rebecca Perkins Cuoco was almost ready to deliver when she gave an amazing speech talking about how much a woman cares about her fetus. But let's turn it around and say, why should the state be forcing women to have invasive procedures? Why should the state be criminalizing doctors for appropriate clinical medical decisions? And a woman who's the subject of rape, incest, or has a fetus that will not survive to term is forced to carry that baby to term. The doctor cannot do anything to help that woman through that process, which they could up until January 1st. That's cruel. That's not the way we do things in New Hampshire. Number one, we trust women to make their own decisions. Number two, we also trust our doctors to make the appropriate clinical decision. And there is no evidence in the state of New Hampshire that there are any elective third trimester abortions. That's the fact. And that's what we need to stick with. We need to stick with our New Hampshire values. We need to stick with our support of women. And remember, this same legislature killed 2 bills that would have provided workplace accommodations for lactation and for pregnancy. This legislature, this governor is saying, we don't trust women to make their own decisions. We don't trust women to be a part of our workplace. We don't trust women. We are in control. That type of institutional misogyny has no place in New Hampshire.
Education freedom accounts. We just had Commissioner Frank Edelblut on the program a couple of weeks ago. He said the state's going to be spending about $8 million on those accounts in the next fiscal year. If, as governor, you can successfully repeal this program, what's going to happen to the children who are already in other schools on the program?
I thought a lot about this. They were budgeted $3 million. By the way, this is less than 1% of all the school-age children in the state of New Hampshire. The remaining 99%, they cut $100 million from the public school budget. This is an attack on the public school. Frank Edelblut has no experience with public schools, personally or professionally, and yet he was put in charge. What he has done in his 5 years is to dismantle our public school system. That has to change. If I do, I would not disrupt a child's education who is currently in the system. That's my pledge, because I believe that would be cruel.
So they'd be grandfathered in, essentially?
Only if they meet the means test that is there. One of the problems with the education freedom accounts is they only do a means test in the first year. So if in the second year you win the lottery and you can actually afford to send your child to private school or homeschool or religious school, you're not tested again. So you've got a 12-year carte blanche on the taxpayer with no accountability to go ahead. How much is that? Well, if it's $5,000 a year, which is the low end, it's going to be a $60,000 bill to the taxpayer with no means testing. There is no other entitlement in the state of New Hampshire or in the federal government or in any of our governmental systems that so lacks accountability or means testing.
You were one of the legislative leaders who led the charge a decade ago to implement a response to something that happened at Exeter Hospital. A medical technician was diverting fentanyl, injecting it into himself, and infecting other patients, for them unknowingly, with hepatitis C. You know, in this case, the offender had been bouncing around the country doing this, and your response was to try and put a little bit more oversight on that. The House has now repealed that. How are you going to convince your fellow senators that this law needs to stay on the books?
Anybody with common sense understands the critical nature of the Board of Medical Technicians. The point of this is that we did a deep investigation after the incident. 32 people in our sphere had hepatitis C. One of our senators' family members actually died. This had a direct impact. Nationally, John Kakavas, who was the U.S. attorney at the time, said that this would affect over 8,500 patients. It was 17 hospitals, and we caught them at Exeter Hospital. In fact, my partner and I were the two who actually identified the patients that actually finally nailed Kakavas. But the point is that we have not had a case of drug diversion, an outbreak of drug diversion in the state of New Hampshire since this board was put in place. So we identified this gap. To repeal the board opens the gap again and puts New Hampshire at risk.
All right, Dr. Tom Sherman, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We'll see you out there on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate being here.